Hello, and thank you for joining me for my service learning project final presentation. I'm Staff Sergeant Payton Schooler, and today I'll be discussing the service learning project organization that I worked with throughout the duration of this course. So as you can see, I am active duty military. I'm currently deployed in the Middle East at IUD Air Base Qatar. I am here with 379th Civil Engineering Squadron, and the service learning project organization that I teamed up with for my project throughout this semester has been the NEO Humanitarian Relief Team. NEO stands for Non-Combatant Evacuation Operation, but since that is quite a mouthful and the military loves acronyms, I'll just use NEO for short. So a brief description of the organization. So obviously we are civil engineers. We have several different sections or flights, as we call them, to our organization to include shop craftsmen, electrical, HVAC, structures, plumbing, so on and so forth. We have our engineering squad flight, and they deal more with contracts, service contracts, facility projects, strategizing, project planning, things like that. I had the opportunity to be hosted under Captain Jacob McGill, and he is our operations flight commander. So he was ahead of me in our unit control center, which is where I worked throughout the duration of our service learning project on the humanitarian relief team. The team that I worked with had approximately 25 personnel from different shops and flights throughout our squadron that comprised our humanitarian relief team. So that way we had different various skill sets across all of the flights. So for a little background on the operation that I was a part of, I'm sure you may have heard in the news about the 2021 Kabul airlift. But if you haven't, here's some backstory. On August 13th and 14th, the Taliban seized all the borders and overthrew the Afghan government. When they did this, we had to evacuate a lot of American allies out of Afghanistan, as well as American troops and a lot of people in the embassy as well. We began evacuating people, and the photo that you see here on this slide, as well as all the photos on this PowerPoint, are real photos that have been taken by our airmen or by our public affairs teams. This was the very first flight from Afghanistan to IUD Air Base Qatar, and this flight in particular broke the world record for the amount of souls on a C-17. I believe we had just about 800 people on board this flight. The evacuation operations were one of the largest airlifts in history, considering the circumstances. Between August 14th and 25th, the United States evacuated over 82,000 people, which all came here for processing. Altogether, over 122,000 people to date, and still counting, have been airlifted abroad. So a description of the project. In the Civil Engineer Squadron, our humanitarian relief team was in charge of providing infrastructure for all the incoming evacuees. This includes shelter, water, power, air conditioning. We also delivered bottled water, hygiene products, so on and so forth. We built tents. We emptied garbages. We delivered potable water, bottled water, and we kind of had our hands in most of the dealings really with the sheltering of all these people. Outside of security and food and medical, we were doing the majority of the heavy lifting, just our team. So it was no small feat. So how we accomplished it, in this picture here, you can see three of our craftsmen discussing the HVAC units. These are portable HVAC units. They're hooked up to converters, and then on the far left of the screen, you see our generators that we've got going. The first flood of people, before we even had any tents built and ready to receive people, it was kind of a last minute shock, and we didn't know people were coming until that first C-17 arrived. So this is one of the hangars that we emptied out all the equipment and planes out of, and we started putting our initial evacuees into this building. So this is us expeditiously working to set that up. So the Unit Control Center is where I spent majority of my time. This is the only picture on this presentation that was not taken during the operations, but this is pretty much what my center looked like. I was watching the screens and just updating information to and from leadership, and then to and from the craftsmen and the people that we had on site. Just tracking all of our assets, ordering things and materials that we needed, and keeping track and accountability for all of our personnel. So some of the tasks and processes that I got to experience throughout the course that related to course material included allocating resources, funds and budgeting, and strategic planning. Of course, all of these things we relied on heavily throughout these operations, and a lot of planning and intuitive thinking. A lot of logistics went into where we set up all the shelters that made the most sense, that we could provide the most security, and that we could utilize all the equipment that we had to the best of our abilities. Allocating resources was also something that we had to get creative with. We worked with other nonprofit organizations in Qatar, to include the Red Crescent, and we worked with them on a lot of things that we didn't have for resources. They brought in a lot of hygiene products that we dispersed, and things like that. Funds and budgeting, that was very interesting. Obviously, with our emergency spending bill, we were able to get some things, but that didn't cover all things that we needed. We ran out of bottled water pretty quickly into the evacuation operation, and it was no small feat to get $1 million worth of water bottle pallets here in such short notice, so that way there was no lack of water for the refugees. So what I learned, communication is key. That was the key component, keeping everything together and keeping everyone organized. Good leadership is crucial to any team, of course. Also making sure that we're planning ahead, and whenever we do have downtime, to utilize that time to strategically plan what our next step is, and how we can continuously improve and innovate our processes to make things go smoother. That first week or two was kind of a chaotic time. We didn't have any heads up, no planning, and so once we kind of got into our battle rhythm, things started going a lot smoother after that. Finally, staying flexible and just remaining resilient was very important for us because, like I said, you just never knew when the next plane was going to arrive, how many people were going to be coming or going, and there was a lot of chaos and things that happened throughout the operations that kind of kept us on our toes. So I would say that was also very important, especially in those unknown times. We were working 6/12s, so most of our personnel were pretty exhausted, and keeping morale flowing as much as we could while also remaining flexible and vigilant was very important throughout the operation. Here is a photo of the hygiene products that we received from the Red Crescent. Again, the Red Crescent is a nonprofit in Qatar. They're based out of Doha, and basically it's a Red Cross, but it's a Muslim faith nonprofit. So they helped gather a lot of materials, diapers, feminine hygiene products, toothbrush, toothpaste, shampoos, body washes, things like that, and we were able to disperse these throughout all the refugees on camp. So my recommendations for the organization moving forward would be to continue to train and prepare for future things that may pop up. Updating policies and funding avenues for emergency use would be extremely helpful. Again, there were some things that were approved for emergency purchases, but not everything that we needed. There was times where we ran out of water trucks or equipment was broken just because we were using so much of it. And we had to purchase equipment, loaders, garbage trucks, water pallets. It got pretty costly, but we really had no options at that point. And so being able to update those policies would be great for the future. Um, Also creating a standby humanitarian relief, and I think this kind of goes back into preparing for future operations. It's no question that this is the most readily available base for any operations like this, and if there ever should be another airlift in the Middle East, they would likely come here, just as they did for this Afghanistan evacuation. So I think having some kind of a team just on standby and up to speed on it at all times, even throughout deployment rotations, would make turnover a lot easier for future teams. And finally, allotting operation locations for the evacuee lodgement. I think this is important. A lot of the locations that we put the initial refugees, like in the hangars, were not the best decisions because then we had nowhere to store our planes and other assets, and the people that we were putting in there, um, it just wasn't a very secure location being that close to the airfield. So I think had we had a heads up and we had time to build tents and the tent cities that we set up on base and off base, I think that that would have been more beneficial to only have people within the tents in those living areas, not only for their safety, but also for the safety of our military personnel as well. Recommendations continued. I would also recommend evaluating the program. I know that we did a debrief at the end of the NEO operations on how well we did, where our strengths and weaknesses are. I think that further evaluation and just really capturing and running reports on that will only give us more information to further improve down the road. And then finally, again, program planning. This base is pretty well established, and it's quite a large base. I think that we're in this awkward movement from being an expeditionary base, and program planning usually is pretty short term, and we're trying to migrate and make our way into a more strategic plan, or enduring as we call it, which would kind of encompass the next 2 to 5 years and any goals that we have for that long-term plan. So I think that that can be done through SMART objectives and SWOT analysis, as we covered in our book this semester. Final thoughts and takeaways. I feel like this was a very eye-opening experience for me. I'm very glad that I was able to have a hand in it. I feel like I really made a difference and I learned a lot. Being in a managerial position also allowed me to utilize more of the tasks that we learned throughout the semester. Granted, volunteering usually entails, just picking up things, delivering things, whatever it may be, kind of the grunt work, but being able to see behind the curtain and actually be in an operations center and running the unit control center and being the UCC manager, that was a very neat role for me, and definitely something that I will move forward with in my career. Finally, I know that we don't have to supply a feedback from our service learning project supervisor, but I did want to share this. This is not my achievement medal, but I was given an achievement medal. I just don't have the piece of paper yet, so I've just put one up here for an example of what it looks like. But Captain McGill was very impressed with me, and he actually took the time to write an achievement medal for me and nominated me for this award. So that was a really neat thing. Not everybody gets these after deployments, and so being able to feel so accomplished and like I did a good job was great. I had a great team around me. Captain McGill was a great mentor, and I learned a lot from him. So overall, I would say that this was a very neat experience, and I hope that I was able to briefly describe all the things that we did over the last 6 months. But yeah, it was a great time. So thank you so much for letting me present this, and I really enjoyed this semester.